Diplomatic tensions have worsened between the US and China after Beijing claimed without evidence that the US flew high-altitude balloons over its airspace and threatened unspecified measures against US entities for undermining Chinese sovereignty. Joining me now live is Dean of Global Futures at Curtin University, Joe Siracusa. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. So the spy balloon saga is rolling on here. What do you make of China's response?
Good afternoon. Well, look, the Chinese are a little embarrassed. They didn't expect to be caught like this. And I think the big takeaway from this is that the civilian government in China, as President Xi and his group, may not have known what the military was doing. I mean, most civilian military organizations don't get on very well. They don't trust each other. And I think this badly embarrasses Xi, who there's no profit in him in tanking American-Chinese relations over this issue. This is not the big issue. This is not Taiwan or the South China Sea or something important to these people. This is a balloon. Then we find out that only one of the four balloons was an actual surveillance balloon, suggesting that perhaps the Chinese have a very highly developed gray area here of intelligence using these balloons instead of satellites, or in addition to satellites. The other three balloons may have been recreational or research balloons. So I think the New York Post speculated that we used a $400,000 missile to bring down a $12 balloon. So much for saving money there. I mean, it's just starting to look ridiculous. It's starting to look like a John Cleese or a Peter Sellers movie. The trouble is that it's very serious because Chinese-American relations are in free fall. And, you know, after this incident, the American Congress, and I mean the Senate and the House, voted unanimously to condemn President Xi as for violating American airspace, and they condemned the Chinese Communist Party for putting up with this. I mean, the fact that every member of Congress, these are people who won't even talk to each other about most things, can agree to be anti-Chinese, and I mean relentlessly anti-Chinese, suggests to me that there's a war party in Washington that's waiting for its moment. And there were parts of this thing here that looked really quite Danica, particularly when the Chinese didn't answer the phone when the Secretary of Defense called up. I mean, there ain't no hotline here as there was during the Cold War with Ronald Reagan and the Soviet Union. So I think it's harder to reach these people in a crisis. Can you imagine if they had taken down an American or a British or an Australian frigate in the South China Sea? I mean, who's going to answer the phone? So without communications, there can be no diplomacy. There can be no easing of tensions. There can be no nothing. So, you know, we're in a very dark space.
Yeah, look, it's been an interesting development this week and one to watch for sure. Let's move on now, because former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley has made that confirmation that she's running for president. How does she stack up against Trump in the Republican challenge?
Well, you know, she worked for Trump. She echoed the same things, you know. Probably 30-40% of Democrats, Republicans will only vote for Trump. She might pick up 20% of Republicans. The others will drift towards Ron DeSantis and maybe some others. But look, she's a breath of fresh air. She's even though she's covered by all the bad things that Trump was doing, or people said he was doing, you know, she says it's time for a change, that it's time for a generational change, and that that politicians should be taking a mental test when they're 75 years old. I mean, I think that's ridiculous. I mean, age is a number. It's not about going in and getting some shrink to say you're okay. There's a lot of mad people in their 50s, for goodness sakes, who got us into Vietnam, Iraq, and other places. So, but she's saying that she's different. She comes from a different generation. It's time for a younger generation to solve America's problems. This is a good story. People used this story in the 1930s try to pack the Supreme Court when Franklin Delano Roosevelt didn't like what they were doing. This is what younger generations always say about older generations, time for them to go. Well, I tell you what, it may be time for them to go, but a lot of younger generation in America are mayors, they're governors, they sit in the legislatures, they sit in the Senate and the House. It's not quite as grim as they think it is. What she means is it's time for Joe Biden to go. It's time for ex-President Trump to go from the scene. These guys are in their late 70s and early 80s. She's saying that they just can't handle it anymore, so you got to turn it over to somebody else. Now, it's a nice little yarn. The only trouble is is that she's suggesting that she's the right person to do it. Can she do that? I don't know if she can. A lot of Republicans will never forgive her for taking down a Confederate flag on an occasion. On the other hand, a lot of independents might think that was a pretty good thing. But once again, she's up against the primaries, and the Republican primaries, Danica, are winner take all. So if Trump gets 28% and she gets 27%, and he's going to take all the votes. I mean,
Yeah.
she has no chance there. So, and of course, the more people that run against Donald Trump, the better it is for him. I remember, and you do too, probably, when he was up against 16 candidates in 2016. And I thought, well, he isn't going to make it. Well, the trouble is, he picked them off one at a time. So he's pretty good. And you know what?
Yep.
He fights dirty.
Yeah, well, yeah, look, it's going to be very interesting, and it's certainly heating up already. We're running out of time, but just finally, the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky addressed EU Parliament in Brussels this week, and he's calling on leaders to provide fighter jets and arms for the war against Russia. Why has this proven to be such a tough decision for EU leaders?
Well, it's a tough decision because they know if they give him fighter jets, and they know it's not going to reach the battlefield in time. You got to train these, got to get them there and train people. They know that that's the final straw, of course, for Vladimir Putin, who has shown a remarkable restraint up against 30 NATO nations, because then the veil is down. I mean, right now we are at war with Russia, and we're pretending that there's a proxy war going on. If these airplanes go there, if these fighter planes go there, and then there's no reason in the world that Vladimir Putin ought to restrain himself, because he can say now that he's at war with NATO. And the thing is this, Danica, he can do whatever he wants to Ukraine. If he wants to use tactical nuclear weapons or something like that. And of course, Joe Biden won't do anything. He'll try to close the war down in 2 minutes. America's not going to go exchange Kiev, Chicago for Kiev, or New York for Kiev, but they have antagonized the hell out of Putin. Of course, what this does is it just cruels the end of this war. I mean, we're not going to get a diplomatic solution if fighter planes are on the way. And Danica, one final thing here. There's a dirty little secret that's finally coming out, and that is Ukraine has been a de facto member of NATO since 2014. All this palaver about them joining NATO, as far as they're concerned, they're already members of NATO. They just don't have a card to get through the door, the swipe card. But he demands a lot of NATO because they know that he's got them tied up in knots. And he knows that he is a de facto member, and that they have bankrolled him the way they would do any other member. And so, the secret's out. And of course, Putin's pretending, it's that little fine red line. The last of the red line is disappearing between direct and indirect involvement. So I'd say that if those fighter planes are authorized, then we'll probably be closer to a war in Ukraine between the great powers than we've ever been before.
All right, Joe Siracusa, we'll leave it there. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, thank you.